By now, we have seen a plethora of smartphones with 5G capability despite the lack of wide 5G coverage across the world. Though it's only been a year since the first 5G phone came out, which was the Galaxy S20, we're starting to see the feature trickle down to more budget devices. In the case of Xiaomi, the Redmi Note 90 5G is their first cheap 5G phone. So after putting it through its paces, using it as my daily driver for several weeks, I realized it's still just a 5G phone. What do I mean by that? Let me explain. While smartphone manufacturers continue to adopt 5G and chip makers try to sell 5G chipsets at a lower price, last year these manufacturers were given the choice to make a smartphone that centers around 5G or a smartphone that offers good specs and value but without 5G. Xiaomi chose the former and came up with the Redmi Note 90 5G. For a budget mid-range phone, this one checks a few of the boxes and omits a few beloved features in exchange for that capability. So instead of using a Qualcomm chipset, this phone is sporting MediaTek's Dimensity 800U, another mid-range chip but with built-in and dual standby 5G. Performance-wise, I will say it's almost as good as Snapdragon 720G on the Redmi Note 9S, which I reviewed half a year ago. As for the GPU performance, it is pretty much on par with the 720G, though I noticed minor stutters at times when playing Battle Royale games. But if you're planning to run Genshin Impact on this one, just forget about it. Even at the lowest possible setting, the game was stuttering consistently. Given that the GPU is somewhat capable of running the game, I think 4GB RAM wasn't just enough to load all the resources. Yep, that's one of the few things Xiaomi had to make to keep that 5G chip. In 2021, 4GB is enough for most games and apps out there, but you have to go higher for newer apps. To be fair, I never had any problems with the Dimensity 800U even when it's coupled with Xiaomi's MIUI 12. Everything felt snappy and quick, whether it's jumping from one app to another or scrolling endlessly through feeds. I'm even surprised that the chip hardly got warm, regardless of what app I'm using. The only few things that bugged me are the bloatware crap that it came with out of the box. I never had these pre-installed games and apps with the Poco X3 and Redmi Note 9S, so I'm surprised that they were here. Xiaomi also has to do more work for its UI to work seamlessly with Dimensity chips. Notifications, more often than not, arrived late and they didn't show directly in the app when I tried opening them. I even once encountered continuous app crashes that required me to reboot just to fix the issue. But for the most part, everything was smooth sailing. Other than the RAM, you can choose to go with 64 or 128GB expandable storage. I have here the former and I'm already near full capacity due to my apps. I hadn't even captured more than 50 photos. As I was daily driving this phone, I also noticed that it's actually thinner and lighter than what the spec sheet described it to be. The majority of the material is plastic, but the back has a rough textured finish that makes it resistive to smudges while keeping the phone easy to grip. It's not as tall as other phones, but it's a tiny bit wider than the others. I will say that I prefer the ergonomics of this phone over the Poco X3, but I'm not a fan of the color and the overall aesthetic. This phone looks good in pictures but not as good in real life, but that's just my opinion. The front is sporting a 6.53-inch display, and while Xiaomi could have included either 90Hz or 120Hz, as usual, the company had to omit a fast refresh rate in favor of 5G. Otherwise, it's the same IPS LCD. At 450 nits, the panel is bright enough to be used outdoors. However, it gets brighter automatically as if it's switching to outdoor mode for better legibility. There is no HDR playback support here, but there is Netflix HD certification. I watched a ton of series on Netflix and the quality of the videos on this phone is great. However, going back to optimization, YouTube videos look like upscaled 720p on the screen regardless of your streaming from the app or browser. Most of you probably won't notice this, but for those with keen eyes, it's worth pointing out. There are two chambers for the dual speaker experience, but the quality isn't on par with the Poco X3 or Redmi Note 9S. It is above average loud but doesn't give you an enjoyable experience. The display is infused with Gorilla Glass 5, but there's a built-in plastic screen protector out of the box, which is a nice bonus. Color-wise, this isn't the best LCD I've used at its price range. The contrast is lacking and the colors are a bit dull due to the cooler tone, but fortunately you can play around with the settings to get a warmer and more accurate tone. Remember when MediaTek sucked at battery efficiency? Well, the same sentiment does not apply here. I can easily get 6 to 7 hours of screen time from the 5000 mAh battery, which includes gaming on 60 frames. But because of 5G, you have to wait for 2 hours to get from 0 to 100% with its 18 watts fast charging technology, as opposed to the 33 watts of its mid-range siblings. Lastly, the cameras. The Redmi Note 9T 5G isn't using a 108 megapixel nor a 64 megapixel to that matter. Instead, it's using a 48 megapixel. It's not a bad lens per se, but clearly Xiaomi has to cut off another limb to make way for 5G. On the flip end, you can still record 4K at a decent quality. For the other two, you get a useless 2 megapixel macro and a somewhat reliable 2 megapixel portrait lens. The photos I took with the main camera showed good dynamic range in daylight and minimal noise indoors. Night mode isn't very impressive when there's a little to no light source. But for the 30 megapixel selfie camera, you always need good lighting to get good photos. You can also tell from my pale looking face that you can turn off beautification entirely. The Redmi Note 9T 5G starts at 10,990 pesos for the 4GB 64GB model, with the option of 128GB storage. Price-wise, it's an unbeatable value for a 5G phone. But then again, 5G probably won't be widely and reliably available until 2022 or 23, especially for developing countries. It's not that the phone is bad, but because the phone lacks the backbone to be good. It's easy to recommend this phone for its price, but it's hard to recommend for its value. If you're an enthusiast like me, you're probably better off with 4G phones but with faster charging, faster display, and better cameras. If anything, I think this phone is just a way for Xiaomi to showcase its ability to release a 5G device that's highly affordable. And yes, I wasn't able to test out the 5G prowess of this phone because of the lack of support in my location. So that's it for my Redmi Note 9T full review. If you want to see more videos like this, feel free to subscribe to this channel. And if you have any questions or clarifications, let me know in the comments section. Until the next video, stay safe.